Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. We're on episode 9 of Neon Genesis Evangelion, and so I really loved episode 8. I said episode 7 was my favorite, and I would put 7 and 8. They're very different episodes, but I both think that they're my favorites so far, 7 and 8, and then 6 comes in like a close, 6 and 3 are like in the top 4 so far. But man, I'm glad we got introduced to Asuka. Maybe I've said that right. As soon as episode 8 aired, people on Patreon were like, wait a minute. It's like, oh no. For the record, if you have not watched any of my other shows, I am terrible at 2 things. I am terrible at geography, and I am terrible at name pronunciation. And so I am the first to admit that I will likely pronounce someone's name wrong and be convinced that that's the right way to say it. And then everybody else is like, no. So I've been told it's Asuka, like Asuka, like the U is silent and you just skip past it and go Asuka. So Asuka, I've been told it was Asuka, like Australia, and then Ka, like Asuka, Anthony 230, Simon Lemon, Anna Kyron, Alex Cornejo. Yeah, they all were like, it's Asuka, and I was like, Asuka. I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna try my best to say Asuka, and then just go from there, or say our fiery redhead, and then we'll just won't worry about it. But yeah, so I had a lot of comments from episodes 7 and 8 that I wanted to go through before we started this. Episodes 7 and 8 just aired on YouTube and Patreon, so I'm recording this pretty early on there. So I did have some comments from Anna Kairuin, noted about the red and blue oni, that there is in Japanese culture the red and blue oni, and that our fiery redhead is more like the red oni, and then Rei is the blue oni. And I was like, oh, okay. And then Alex Cornejo added on to that, saying, you know, if you put blue and red together, you get purple. What's the color of Shinji's Eva? It's purple. So I'm like, oh, okay. And then several people have noted, like, the sun and the moon parallels, that there's, like, you know, the sun is obviously Asuka, and then Rei is the moon. And I was like, I like that. And then Shinji is our star, you know. But Alex Cornejo also noted about how, NERV is a bit shady and has some shady characters. Gendo's definitely the shadiest of all of them, but Kaji's right up there. Kaji's a trickster. He tricks you by being hot, and then he shows up with this briefcase with this weird specimen in it. They say is the first human called Adam. Okay. Nothing to see here. But Alex noted how, NERV has, you know, a lot of things that are kind of brushed over the surface, and Shinji just doesn't seem quite aware of them because he's a 14-year-old kid, and kids in these worlds, they're not listening to the history teacher, so they're clearly not paying attention to politics of what's going on in the actual world, and a lot of it's top secret, so how would they know? But Alex noted that NERV so far has normalized child soldiers. It's totally fine. Bankrupted other countries and companies, but entire countries by taking their money for their funding, caused possible mass starvation, no big deal, engaged in industrial sabotage with competitors, we'll talk about that more in a second, and then decimated the Pacific Fleet, so no worries. I was just like, yeah, NERV is sketch, and clearly are operating under less than ideal circumstances towards less than ideal goals. And we don't even know what this whole thing with Adam is, but I'm gonna guess it's not good. I'm gonna guess it's not warm, fuzzy sunshine and rainbows. So there's that. Nicholas Novacek Bunt noted that in a lot of episodes, when we look at Gendo, we don't see his eyes. They're blocked out. It's the classic, you know, Japanese animated trope. But then at the end scene with Kaji, we see his face perfectly. Like there's nothing to hide, that he is excited about Adam and its role in the Human Instrumentality Project. So that's terrifying. I don't know if I'm more terrified of Gendo when I don't see his eyes or when I do. I'm thinking when I do. Because if he's being sincere about something, we've established Gendo's a little emotionally removed from the world, so that's problematic. Bright Girl noted that Asuka entering the story is like throwing a firecracker into a funeral. I was like, oh my god, that's kind of the best analogy I think I've heard all week. Throwing a firecracker into a funeral. Because yeah, Shinji and Rei are not upbeat characters at all. Shinji's gotten better. He's really grown over these last 8 episodes. But he's not, you know, a jovial sunshine character at all. And Rei is the opposite of a sunshine character. So you take somebody fiery like Asuka and just be like, hey guys, I'm here to shake things up. Yeah, firecracker to a funeral, Absolutely. I love that analogy. That's perfect. Christopher Peterson noted that and this kind of ties back to the whole thing about sabotaging different other competitors. The fact of the matter is that, yeah, and then I'm also going to talk about AJIN kind of hinted along the same lines here, that there has been proven to be ways to get through the AT field with these EVAs. Christopher noted how we basically had 2 battleships come at the last angel while its mouth was pried open by Asuka and Shinji's EVA, and then was able to like basically penetrate through the AT field. We had that, and then we had the long range, the firing, the missile, the laser, everything. So even though Masato tells the ship captains that the EVAs are really for close combat, which is necessary to kill the angels, that's not 100% true. The thing of it is that Christopher notes is that it took literally 2 battleships, and the one laser back episode 5 was, and episode 6 was literally powered by all of Japan. So as long as you can get the entire firepower of an entire country's electrical grid, you'll be fine. It's just the fact of the matter of how much it takes for it to work. But the fact of the matter is it does work. So that's the thing. NERV and Masato and the others are proposing this idea that the EVAs are the end-all, be-all, only way to stop the angels. But we've seen that's not exactly true. It just would take a lot of development and time, and those precious funds that NERVs are funneling, that would have to go into something else. And NERV does not want that. So it is interesting to see that we've seen throughout the show so far that there are ulterior means to destroying the angels. They just would require a lot of resource and funding that NERV does not want to share. And so that's very interesting. And then AJA, my final comment here, is that in episode 6, why didn't they give Shinji a smock? I thought that was really funny. In the hospital scene, he's just naked in bed. They're like, you couldn't give this boy some scrubs, like a smock, some kind of robe, something. You just left him in bed. And that whole exposure of Shinji, I think, is part of just the playing on the tropes, like we talked about in the last episode about femininity and gender roles, and just leaving Shinji is exposed a lot in this series, which is interesting because normally in anime and in like action stories or sci-fi, the male characters, we don't normally see them as exposed and vulnerable as Shinji is. So it's kind of refreshing to see a story where your main character is left so bare and open to the outside world and for the audience. But yeah, so episode 9, now that Asuka's been introduced into the fold, I don't know exactly how Rei is going to handle her. She seems, and I don't know how Gendo's going to handle her, to be honest. She seems like I figure Kaji is there in the same vein that Masato is there. Kaji's there to keep Asuka in check, just like Masato is there to keep Shinji in check. Although Shinji does pretty well for himself. He keeps Masato in check outside of the field, outside of NERV. So I don't know. I'm really excited for this episode, y'all, and to see, now that we're in the second act, we've got our 3 characters together, our main trio. Where do we go to from here? So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start episode 9 of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And we're going to start that here in 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to turn the sound up and let's go. Whew. Oh my gosh. So about each episode becoming my new favorite. So here's something about me. I am a huge romantic. I don't look it, but I do like some romance in my stories. If it's done well. If it's done well and it relates to the plot and the characters and it ties to thematic elements of it. The one thing that I love about this episode is that, yeah, we finally get some romance. I talk about Attack on Titan. There ain't a lot of romance in Attack on Titan because I don't think Isayama's like, this world doesn't need that. But this world's pretty terrible too in Neon Genesis. But there's some spiciness in this episode. Kaji, you smooth operator. Kaji. Oh, buddy. Where do we start? But yeah, I get now. Christopher Peterson noted that it's odd for a series. They noted in episode 8 that it was odd for a series to introduce one of its core characters this far into the show because we're 9 episodes in. We're a fourth of the way through the series. And so introducing Asuka this late, it seems odd, but I get why they introduce her so late now, because we needed Shinji to get to this level. The whole near kiss scene with Shinji, if you had her come in at episode 3, back when Shinji ran off, if you'd had her come in during that whole deal, and then the events in this episode wouldn't have happened. Not at all. So I think it's smart on the writer's part and the creator's part to wait until our main protagonist has developed a little more emotionally and a little maturely through the course of these first 8 episodes, then introduce this fiery redhead and go from there. And that way, the events that happen in this episode seem much more natural. They seem much more natural. And I want to talk about the childish versus maturity thing, because that seems like a big part of this episode too, especially in relationships to Asuka and Shinji's relationship, along with Rei, and then you get into Kaji. And Kaji, you heartbreaker. Kaji is hot. He is so hot in this, and like, what an operator, but he's just, I feel for Masato. I feel for this girl. Like, my heart is aching for her, because he's a player, and it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well at all, right? But man, this episode was so good. Like, the synchronization and the little tiny details in the background. We'll talk about this. One thing that's amazing about this series is that the actual battles themselves, they're on a timer. They're just a minute long. It's like at the most 5 minutes, but it's just a minute-long battle, and that's it. That's all we need. The rest of the episode, what I love about this series so far is that the battles are just, it's a minute long. It's all you need. That's all we had to have, and then we move on. The real meat of the story is not the mecha battles. It's the lead up, the character development, and getting the characters to be in the mindset for the battle to happen. That's the big thing. And that's just, it's genius. I love it. It's amazing. And oh my gosh. But yeah, so holy cow. Yeah, we need to talk about this. We do need to talk about this quite a bit. I love this episode so much. Gendo was not present. It seems like we can have good times when Gendo's not here. It seems like that seems to be the case, right? Oh my gosh. So we need to go back to this episode. I'm going to skip the OP. I feel like there's a couple images that I still... Okay, so want to see, there's a few things in the OP that were not set up. We had Rei and the moon, right? We had the maps, and we'll talk about the map. And then Gendo. And then we get the imagery of Shinji being left behind. That thing was... We got that little imagery in there. There was a thing with eyes that we saw. There was a thing with several different types of eyes with the NERV symbol. I'm trying to think. And then it looked like there was a symbol of a man. Yeah, the symbol of eyes. There's a man with a head thing over his face. A different type of Eva that looks different than the others. I'm assuming that might be one of the other types that, like the Unit 6 they were talking about. Unit 2. And then we see Toji. We see Ida, we see the class rep, who has not been dignified with a name yet. And then, yeah, so Gendo. And then we see Shinji being left behind. Masato with the fan service. The angel. Rei being, like, she's naked in an image. And she's next to, like, a beaker of what looks like water. I don't like that. And it looks like young Akagi. Okay, the one person by themselves looks like young Akagi. Okay. Or maybe that's Shinji's mom. It could be either one. Might be Shinji's mom, because it doesn't quite look like Akagi. Okay, interesting. Okay. I feel like there's stuff with the OP that we're just getting more and more of as we go. And it's interesting. So, Asuka. I'm glad I got the name right now. Okay. So we learn a little bit more about Asuka, right? And again, Asuka is our shonen protagonist. She's just if she were a male character, she would be your stereotypical male shonen protagonist. But there's so much about her character that's so different than Rei and Shinji. I love it. I told my brother that I'd met Asuka, and he was like, oh, he's not a big Asuka fan, but I don't know why. He wouldn't elaborate. He was just like, oh, Asuka, yeah. I was like, what? And he was like, So I don't know. My brother's not, I think my brother's more of a Rey fan. I don't know. I feel like there's Camp Rey, Camp Asuka. But he wouldn't elaborate because I've told him I don't want spoilers. So, there. But yeah, it is a little bit creepy, yes, that Ida is taking photos of Asuka and selling them to the boys in the school. You know, so we have Ida taking her photo. But here's the thing. She's very perceptive. She realized that Shinji was trying to kiss her and everything. And we'll talk about that whole scene. We'll talk about that scene, you 14-year-old girl. Okay. But I'm taking her photo. So I'm sure that Asuka knows that her photo is being taken. She's gotten all the love letters. So she is Miss Popular. She is the foreign exchange student that's come in and everybody's in love with her, right? Have you seen The Foreign Girl yet? And she's an 8th grade class A. Yeah, she transferred here last week and saying that she's hot. And so it says Asuka Langley Soryu photo order sheet. Great deal. 30 yen per picture. Oh my God, there's an order sheet. How you dogs. No. Wow. Her name's Asuka Langley Soryu. And so yeah, then them peeping on the girls' locker room changing. She was raised over there, but born here. Ah, okay. So she's born Japanese. Okay. But raised in Germany. Okay. Again, this series does a really cool thing where they explain all of this exposition to you while they're showing you different imagery. So they're giving you her backstory subtly, like by just sprinkling these crumbs of exposition. But the whole time they're doing it, they're giving you all this imagery, most of it fan service, so that you just kind of, it just sort of glosses into your memory, whether you know it or not. It just kind of embeds itself in there. It's interesting. So that's curious. So that leads me to think a couple of different things related to NERV and this whole human instrumentality project, which I think is related to the pilots sort of thing. So with NERV, there comes a few questions, and obviously I don't want spoiler answers in the comments, but there's just things I'm thinking about. So are all EVA pilots Japanese, that, or at least were born in Japan and then went to wherever the facilities were that were training the EVA units? So it could be that she was born in Japan and was taken to Germany because that's where they said they were building the EVA, the Unit 2. So when Gendo's talking to the guy on the plane, they're talking about Unit 6. I'm not exactly sure what country that man's from. It's not Japan. So assuming that they've taken a kid that's going to be a pilot and taken him to that country to be raised and trained. Interesting. Now, we know nothing about Asuka's family, except the only thing she says is mama. And she said it, I believe, in German. So, that there's been a noticeable absence of mothers in this series, and I'm sure that's intentional. We don't know why yet. I don't know why yet, but it's noticeable that Shinji's mom's not there. Neither of Rei's parents are there, so we know nothing about them. But Toji and Ida, they make the comment about Ida's father. We don't hear anything about the mother. And then with Toji, we hear about the aunt, I think, and grandparents, but we don't hear anything about, and the father, but we don't hear anything about the mother either. So there's clearly a weird absence. It's odd. But yeah. But she says mama, but we know nothing about her parents. So we don't know if they're still in Germany. We don't know if they're dead. We know nothing about them. Just that she seems to be sad about her mom, whatever the case may be. And they say, do you think she matured early? So that kind of ties back to the last episode's comment where she said that she's filled out. You know, she's filled out. So she is a little bit more mature for her age, even though she's 14. These perverted boys. Man, back in the day, like, what a 90s callback. The current generation will not understand the going to the Photoshop and just taking your photos and hoping they turned out well. For doing, like, just camera work that you can't see and edit the photos in real time, these boys have got some photography skills. They could go into journalism for sure. Or work for a magazine, but that's very curious. I bet she broke up in Germany and she's here in a foreign land with a heart that can't be mended. Wow. So yeah, they've come up with basically she is popular but not well known. It's interesting because you have Rei, Shinji, and Asuka are 3 pilots, right, who are in charge of saving the world. And it's funny how it works because you have Shinji. We'll put old Shinji over here. And Shinji is really, he is just known as the pilot. Like, all that people seem to care about with Shinji is that he's an EVA pilot and he's saving the world. Nobody really, except for Toji and Ida and the other students that know who he is, nobody, with the exception of Toji, Ida, and maybe Rei and Asuka, really care to be Shinji's friend. He's just the pilot saving Earth. They're just like, you're saving the world, whoop. And so he's known for that. Then you have Asuka, who is known for her looks. That's the frustrating thing, I'm sure, for Asuka, is that she gets all these love letters and people are making up these scenarios about her, but she's like, I'm the same as Shinji, if not better. Why aren't you recognizing me as the pilot? So she's being recognized because of her sex and because of her looks rather than Shinji. She's not being recognized for the role she's playing in saving the world, which, surprise, surprise, right? And I love that they're like to Miss Soryu, and she just crushes it. She's just like, I don't give a shit about these letters. And that reveals what she really thinks. She's Miss Popular, and she's going along with it and being all sunshiny. But in reality, she's like, I don't give a shit about these letters. I'm here to save the world. I want to be known for that, right? That's the sad thing, is she's not being, because of her gender, she's not being recognized for what she is. Like, Shinji's only recognized as the pilot, and that's all she seems to want. But Shinji, I guess Shinji, by standards, the other middle school girls don't find Shinji hot, so that's probably why. And they're like, everybody and their brother like her, Asuka, and all the other girls hate her because they're like, this foreign girl coming in with her fiery red hair. They're just ignorant. Oh my God. At least the pictures don't reveal her personality. And I love, again, Toji, yeah, she's not well known. Again, I think that by the end of this, her and Toji could be a thing. I don't know, because Toji's other than Shinji, we'll talk about that, maybe, unless it's Shinji, that they just don't know her personality. That's so funny. I love that Toji's the only one that's like, we're just using her for her looks. Like, she's actually a bitch. It's like, haha. And then I love that she's like, hello, Shinji. Guten Morgen. It's like the only German I know. It's like Guten Tag and Guten Morgen. And he's like, oh, Guten Morgen. And so here's the thing. She's like, this is the gorgeous Asuka greeting you. I love that because she seems mystified that Shinji, our teenage boy, is the only one that's not, falling head over heels for her. Now, Toji obviously isn't, because he doesn't like her. He doesn't like her personality. But she doesn't understand why Shinji is different than the other guys. She's like, hey, I'm the gorgeous Asuka. Aren't you going to greet me? Aren't you going to be over, falling down at my feet like every other boy in this school? And Shinji seems like he is not aware. But Shinji is just a normal teenage boy, but he's very introverted and shy about things. And so she's like, look, I'm a little more happy about it. And he's like, leave me alone. You're so mean. And so she says the other one's here too, isn't she? Like, that's the one thing that Asuka does that's very odd. She at first views Shinji and Rei just as the other ones, right? She doesn't really refer to them. It's almost like they're not other people, they're just other pilots. Like, we're just doing our job together. We're just, she almost, the way that she phrases it sometimes makes it feel like Shinji and her and Rei are just, which they literally are. They're just cogs in this machine that is saving Earth, which is not far off. It's pretty accurate, but there's not that humanization of it at first, where she's like, where's the other one? The first child. Like, just the terminology she uses, it's almost like that's been just drilled into her head, that they're just tools to be used by NERV to save the world, and they don't really have any other function. So Interesting. And I love we have the escalator. The little escalator scares, like, it's very futuristic. Why don't we have that in real life? That'd be great. I mean, we have escalators, but out in the public, I guess because operationally it would not be as good. But anyway, he's like, oh, Ayanami. And then, of course, and so here's the thing. You have Asuka, you have Shinji known as the pilot, Asuka known for her looks, and then there's Rei that is ignored because she's odd, right? That's so funny that Shinji's the one that's gotten all the press for saving the world, so everybody knows he's the pilot. Asuka is hot, so all the guys notice her and all the girls don't like her. But Rei is in this weird place where Rei is not, the other boys don't think she's hot. She's odd. She's cold and distant. She doesn't try to make new friends. She doesn't try to be all sunny and up in everybody's business. She's off by herself. And because Gendo and the others aren't letting her pilot the Eva on her own or take charge of any of these missions, she's not getting known like Shinji is. So Rei is just kind of off in her own world here. And she seems fine with it. She's just reading. She seems like she's totally okay with being off in her own world. But Asuka and her, like, their personalities, this is exactly how I thought it was going to go down. That Rei would just be like, no. So what's she reading? Is she reading something in German? Oh, okay. So again, this series loves to do things where it gives you things and you don't exactly know what it is. So it says first Ludwig von Anhalt wurde zu einer. So is she reading something in German? I think she might be. Oh my gosh. Personen von Ultrahem Gerschlich. She's reading in German, isn't she? Oh, interesting. So, does she know German then? What? I don't necessarily want to know, but this looks like German. Or it looks like, it's not Japanese. It is a different language. That would be funny if she's been learning German to, in her own way, relate to Asuka. If she's been learning and reading in German to try to brush up in order to communicate with her. Because maybe she was ordered to do so. Maybe Gendo was like, you need to learn German so that you can communicate with, you can sync up with Asuka like what Shinji's doing in case if it's needed. Because that's the thing. Rei, as long as you give her an order, she's like a little robot. She'll just instantly do it. So if she's given the order to sync up with Asuka, even if she doesn't like Asuka personally, she'll do it because Gendo says it's to save the world. Makes sense. Shinji is not quite a robot, as robotic as Rei is at this point. So Shinji's kind of developed his own personality more by being around Masato and the others. So that's interesting. But I love when she moves the book thinking that it's a shadow at first, and then she's like, oh God, no, it's you. I love that when she tries to move it out of the shade. That's so funny. And then that look, that shade, she's like, yes. Like, you're interrupting me reading. The pilot of the prototype. And the posturing here. Like, Asuka, I'm Asuka Langley Soryu. And the way that she stands up on the pedestal above Rei. Like, that's the thing, too. She doesn't just walk up beside Rei and be like, hello. It's clearly like a power move of Asuka being like, oh, you're the first pilot, but I'm the best pilot. So it's like a power move. It's like, oh, interesting. And of course, everybody is now watching to see what happens. Let's be good friends. And I love Rei's response. Why? She's like, why? Why should we be friends? You seem like the worst. It'd be convenient in a lot of ways. And she's like, if I'm ordered to, I will. So yeah, it's funny that at this point in the series, because Rei and Shinji kind of started along similar pathways where they both were just following orders and doing things because they were told to. But Shinji, over the course of these interpersonal relationships with Masato and the others, has kind of started to develop his own identity and his own free will to be like, to argue and counter, when people tell them to do something. But Rei is not emotionally there. Rei is still in the I'm given an order, I follow it, I don't question it sort of mentality. And she seems still a little void of her own agency. And so that's great. And Asuka's like, talk about odd. And then I love that Shinji didn't even follow her. Shinji was like, I'm not even going down there. Shinji's like, I'm not messing with it. And Toji's like, I'll say our only weirdos chosen to be pilots. Well, seems you have to meet a certain qualification, right? We're just not entirely sure what that qualification is, other than you have to be 14. But I love this transition. The transition from only weirdos chosen to be pilots to the sixth angel on the screen is brilliant. That's such a great transition. I'm like, yeah. I think someone commented, I can't remember who, but they commented saying that in the last episode, or in episode 7, the art director was mirroring Kubrick, and I'm like, oh, you can totally see it. You can totally see it. And some other people were commenting that the studio, I think it was NL, was commenting that Studio IG had worked on the last episode, like in the framework and everything. And I was like, yeah, I love that these animation studios all have had a hand in creating this series, and the art styles kind of, you can see it, like in episode 8, Esteban commented again saying, oh, this is like, or it was in Free, we were watching the Free movie, and in the Free movie there's a scene where there's an office space and you see the coach of one of the swimmers, and it looks like the boardroom that Gendo is in for Neon Genesis. And Esteban was like, oh, look, I didn't know that Albert was swimming at NERV headquarters. And I was like, yeah, but you know that the art director for KyoAni Studios that makes Free worked on Evangelion, so that influence is carried over, 20 years later into another series. It's so cool. I love it. But yeah, so we go to this whole thing. So it says sixth angel pattern blood type blue. So it is another blue blood one. So it's different than the pyramid angel. The pyramid angel had red blood, and we haven't gotten information about the pyramid angel yet. They have notably not told us about the pyramid angel. They're keeping that under wraps. I don't get good vibes from that because it's got the red blood. It's different, or seems different, right? This scene though, Akagi just sitting there and then getting snuck up on behind. And again, we talk about gender roles, right? We talk about gender roles in this. Old Kaji, our smooth operator. Kaji is the seducer. Kaji is our temptress, right? He is our tempter, right? And so it's funny because Akagi and Masato both are given, up until this point, these more masculine archetypes, right? Because normally in a series that I've seen before, the song and dance is that you have, like the male scientist character or the commander of the unit, and they're usually men, and they have a lot of attributes that Akagi and Masato have, and then they throw in this woman comes in to be the seductress, the temptress, to kind of shake things up. And here it's flipped. You have Akagi and Masato, who are female characters in the role of the scientist and the commander. And old Kaji comes in, this man, to be the seducer. And it's like, it's hot, but characters like Kaji in real life, I'm like, oh, hell no. I'm not into a player. No. And he's like, oh, have you lost some weight? And she's like, oh, have I? You must be enduring an unrequited love. And she's like, oh, how did you know? Kagi's onto it, right? Akagi's on to what he's throwing down, and he tries to be like such the tempter, such the seducer. And I like that Akagi is smart enough. She's like, I know what you're about, Kaji. Akagi's like, I get it. And she's like, I'll play along for a part. But I feel like both of them, or at least Akagi, knew that Masato was there, and she's like, I'll give Akagi props though. She's a good friend. She's like, I ain't doing this song and dance. She's like, oh, how did you know? And this line where he's just like, oh, the whole thing where he like caresses her cheek, I'm like, stop. That is dangerous. You don't do that, Kaji. Oh, he says, because a woman with a mole in the pathway of her tears is destined to a life full of them. Oh, like this, and his voice acting, there are certain voices that I get really attracted to. I'm like, oh, and Kaji's voice in those scenes, yep, that'll do it. But yeah, I love that Kagi's like, I'm afraid if you're trying to make a move on me, you can't. And I love that she's like, look, there's a very scary lady watching us. Masato. Masato's like, I hate you. Not Akagi. She's like, Kaji, you snake. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kaji, here's the thing. If we're going by biblical analogies, Kaji is the snake in the Garden of Eden. I'm convinced of it. He is the snake. And I love that in the glass, I didn't notice this, but in the glass, you have Masato who's just like, I hate you right now. And Akagi's looking up at Kaji like, you okay? And Kaji's just like, he does this like, there you are. Yeah. Oh, I love it. And she's like, long time no see, Kaji. And he's like, oh yeah, it's been a while. She's like, you're pretty careless. He's as much of an idiot as ever. Yeah. Poor Masato. Masato is still in love with him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Masato is still in love. Mm-hmm. Okay. Masato is still in love with Kaji. And it's funny because the way this episode works is that I could see Kaji and Akagi together. I could see them based on their personalities together. It's like Kaji and Masato is more of like this passionate bomb, whereas Akagi and Kaji seem to have a little bit more stability, but Akagi also seems not really interested in him. She just kind of like goes along with it. But it's funny, we're seeing more and more how this trio of characters is very different from our current trio of characters, especially in how they handle relationships and how they feel about each other, at least at this point, right? Because I feel like, if we're going to come over here, I feel like you have Kaji, he's a snake. I can't trust him. It's like, where is his actual loyalties and who does he actually love? Does he even love either of them? He may not love either of them. Masato clearly is still in love with Kaji and has a history with him. But she also has this very close friendship with Akagi that, at the beginning of the series, I was thinking it was more than that. And so now I don't know, right? It seems like they just have this really intense friendship. And Kaji, who knows what he feels like with either of these women? He could be playing both of them. Like, I don't get that vibe at all. And it's funny because then you have Shinji, and Shinji seems to have a closer connection with Rei, right? But there's almost this sexual attraction to Asuka, and we'll talk about this, right? It's interesting that there's this more physical, I'm going to put like a physical. It's more of a physical attraction to Asuka and more of an emotional connection with Rei. Right? So I said in the last episode that Kaji and Masato kind of reminded me of Shinji and Asuka, but they're very different. They are very different. Shinji, I think, is definitely closer to Masato. Shinji and Masato are closer together, but I don't think Asuka is like Kaji as much. She's kind of like Kaji a little bit, but not manipulative like Kaji. Kaji's manipulative. Ooh, buddy. But yeah, she's like, if you're done handing over the unit 2, then leave. But he's like, no, I received orders that I'll be staying here on loan. And she's like, the 3 of us can hang out like we used to. And she's like, who'd hang out with you? This girl's got it bad. Masato has it bad with him. But I do like that when there's an emergency, Masato's like, screw you, seducer, I'll deal with you later. We got a job to do. I like that she can put off personal life to handle, which I feel bad for Masato, because not only like Masato's life outside of NERV is barely hanging on by a thread, right? It's all disheveled, and if Shinji hadn't been there, I think it would have all collapsed. But now at work, she has to deal with romance in this business, and it sucks, because if you're in a relationship with someone, because she establishes that her and Kaji used to date, if you're in a relationship with someone and then you break it off with them, or it doesn't end up going any further and it kind of fizzles away, but you're forced to still be around them all the time, it sucks. It's not fun. No. know. And it's like, you had to put up a barrier. I dated someone in college, and we were roommates, you know, it was the classic trope. And then we stopped dating, and just kind of the relationship fell apart. But then I still had to live with them for like another 6 months. And it was really hard, because it's just, you had to literally put up a barrier to be like, no, that part's over. Nope, we can't do that anymore. There's nothing between us like that. And so it's hard, because if you still kind of have those feelings for someone, even if they're not really there, it's still the fact of being around them, right? There's a big thing about closeness and physicality and being in each other's spaces that brings people together, right? It's that proximity, right? And I would argue that Shinji, here's the thing, Shinji starts to develop this physical attraction for Asuka because they're so close, because it's that proximity, right? It's natural. It's like something almost biological, right? That they're just around each other all the time. And Shinji's he's a teenage boy, and he's going through puberty, and so there's all these hormones, and he's like, oh crap, yeah, is pretty, and I am attracted to her. And that he nearly kisses her because it's just the proximity of it, right? But then she speaks and says that whole mama thing, and he's like, and then he realizes where he is, and the tape stops. I will talk about that scene. But he's like, oh no. And then the reality of the situation, and his brain starts to catch up with his body, and his brain's like, nope, let's not do that. And so he stops. But with Rei, there is distance, right? So even though right now Shinji has that more emotional connection to Rei, I'd say that a big part of there not being any physicality between him and Rei is that Rei there's no proximity for it to develop. She's too distant. She's like, no. Like this whole thing of the whole synchronization of them like brushing their teeth together, eating noodles together, doing all this together that him and Asuka go through. There's no way that Rei would be up for that at this point in the story. So yeah, that physical attraction that develops between Shinji and Asuka, it's just not there because there's not been that proximity or that situation and environment for that to develop with him and Rei. Could it develop with him and Rei? I think so, but Rei is nowhere near letting that even remotely get close to happening. So it's like, So they find out that there's a huge submerged object detected off the peninsula. And so they say, okay, analysis according to Magi, or Magi, I think it's Magi, wavelength blood type blue. Okay, so they established that it's an angel, confirmed to be an angel. Okay. All personnel go to battle stations. Again, we talk about red versus blue, and we talk about the red and blue Oni and combining them together to make purple. We have humans that are red-blooded. You have the angels that are blue-blooded. It's funny because it's like, Rei is more cold and distant, kind of like the angels, almost non-human. And then you have Asuka, who's like the embodiment of a red-blooded human being. So yeah, interesting. Moment and heart together. I just love it. And then we still see the pyramid. The recent battle severely damaged the intercept system of New Tokyo 3. Okay. And so we see all this weaponry going out. We've only affected 26% of the repairs at present. So yeah, they're only like a quarter of the way through the repairs since that battle against the one angel, against the pyramid. Our operational capability for actual combat is virtually nil. And we see the two like bomber planes going in with the Evas. Interesting. So like we're barely holding on by a thread here. So it's important that we crush the target in a single blow. All right, at the water's edge right before it makes landfall. A series of waves. Close in and take turns. Okay. And so, of course, it makes sense why she sends both of them. She's like, look, we don't have a lot of functionality right now. We don't have a lot of budget, so we need to just go in. We'll do both units. Go in. It'll take half the amount of time if there's two of you working together. We'll get it done in half the amount of time, half the amount of resources. Right? No. It is curious that they chose Asuka over Rei, but Asuka did make a big deal in the last episode about saying how her EVA unit is the one more suited for combat. And it's like, okay, sure you say. So that makes sense, I guess, why she was so gung-ho about it. But in the same vein, it's kind of funny because Rei syncs up better with Shinji, as we find out, but Asuka's like, no, this is my debut. And she's mad because, again, she's viewing this kind of like a game. She's like, why won't she let me take it out myself? And Shinji's like, well, it can't be helped. That's the strategy. Shinji's trying to be optimistic and also being like, shut up. Like, in Shinji's own way. He's like, this is just how it has to be, right? And she's just like, Asuka is not used to taking orders. One, it seems like she's not used to taking orders because she's been by herself training. And she doesn't understand the value of teamwork, and she's viewing this still as like a game. It's funny because she's this 14-year-old kid that's like, I'm going to be the hero and fight the monster. And it's like, we've established all of the ramifications of NERV and fighting this monster, and like how much budget it's costing, how it's affecting countries' economies, how it's affecting mass populations of people, how it's affecting the entirety of the environment of these locations like New Tokyo 3. We've established how real and dangerous this entire situation is, but this 14-year-old girl's like, I want to defeat the monster on my own. It's just that contrast, and it's kind of like the show is poking fun at other series that have that mentality of, okay, child soldier, go fight the monster. And this series is showing like the actual ramifications under the surface that we, the audience, know exist, but our child characters do not, right? It's fascinating. And she's like, let me tell you something. Just don't get in my way. And I like that Shinji's like, I wasn't planning on it, but we got to work together. Oh, why did someone like him get to be chosen as a pilot? Like, she just doesn't respect Shinji. She doesn't understand. But again, I don't think she'd respect anybody that was in that position, honestly. I think she thinks so highly of herself at this point as a pilot. She doesn't get why Rei's a pilot. She doesn't get why Shinji's a pilot. I think she would grumble and complain about anybody, even if they were highly capable. I think she'd still be like, why are they a pilot? I think she just would be critical of anybody at this point. So yeah, so we're outside of Tokyo 3. Like, that's why Masato gets all of the letters and the PR stuff, because they're not in New Tokyo 3 anymore. They're like on a peninsula, like out in public ground, right? I will say, one of my favorite things about this show is just the little things, like the little behind the scenes things. So when the Evas land, you know, in another anime, in another shonen, they would land and be all combat ready and ready to go and start fighting the monster instantly. But because this is Evangelion, and because we've established that these Eva units need to be attached to the support system to work, because we've established that, I just love the little shot of the little thing coming on the screen that has the support system. I love the little shot of this the little unit coming in there with the crane. It's so great. It's just those little touches in the animation that are just like chef's kiss. It's wonderful. Just to remind us of the reality of the mechanics of this world. And so then Asuka saying 2 against 1 isn't a fair fight. I don't like it. It's not my style. So she's like, and I love that Masato comes in being like, we don't have the luxury of choosing our means to survive. And I do agree with that. Like, you don't get the luxury to pick your battles. It's against a giant monster that could destroy the world. You just have to do what you can to survive. Masato's like, let's think more like an adult in this situation. We'll talk about maturity versus immaturity, right? So maturity-wise, I'm going to go ahead and put it on here. So we have maturity and we have immaturity. Because we have adults with these 14-year-old kids, right? And the twist is that the kids are the ones that are getting the responsibility of saving the world, right? So in battle and combat, you have Masato, who is the one dictating, you know, you don't get to choose how you fight in order to survive. And you have Asuka treating the battle like a game, right? And Masato says it's all about survival. So you have two very different outlooks on this entire fight with the angel, right? Interesting. So we have that. And then as they get hooked up and ready to go, I love it. And so Shinji saying, here it comes. And I love that she has a spear and he has the gun. And I just, of course, the angel, it's so fitting. It's almost like these angels were handpicked for the scenario. That's not what they were going to fight, though. Just saying, especially this one, because it has the yin and yang. It has the blue and the pink. I'm like, is Gendo just like hand picking these angels? Is that where he is? Is Gendo off like looking, being like, that angel, let's send that one? Is that what he's doing? Obviously, I don't think so. Although it does tie coincidentally to when Shinji came, when the first angel appeared. Shinji arrived at NERV. I don't know. I don't want spoilers, but it's very curious. It's very curious. This seems the most on-the-nose angel we've seen so far, in the oddest of ways. And so, yeah, Masato's like, let's commence attack. And then, of course, Asuka says, back me up, I'm going first. And Shinji's like, back you up? And she says, ladies first. And he's like, you're the new one, don't order me around. So, yeah, they're not in sync at all. They're fighting over who gets to battle what. And Shinji's like, no, don't just leap over there. And then Studio Fantasia, she's, again, collateral damage. That's the thing. Masato getting all of these requisitions afterwards, and then being like, look at all the damage you caused. Asuka didn't even consider what she was destroying when she leapt onto the building. She's just like, oh, nope, going after the angel. All the other stuff is inconsequential. Gotta face it. And it's like, oh. And then she just leaps ahead, destroys these buildings, and cuts it in half. And does what you would think every other shonen protagonist would do. Just slice it in half. Easy peasy. And Shinji's like, oh, wow, that was amazing. And she's like, well, third child, a fight should be elegant and without waste. But because you didn't know the enemy at all, it split into two beings. Yeah. Of course it did. And then you actually see the core of it. And I love Masato's like, with the scouter, with the Dragon Ball scouter, she's like, that's cheating, not fair. Oh my god. Also, this transition. It's possibly one of my favorites in this series so far, because this series, it does not show you what happened afterwards. The series is notorious for being like, you don't get to see the part where they sucked. You just get to see the aftermath, right? You just get to see the aftermath. And this transition to the rainbow lens of the projector, showing them what's happened. And I love that Kaji, our snake, he's always smirking. So he has always the weirdest look on his face. It's a smirk, but his eyes are really soft. So you can't tell if he's upset. You can't tell if he thinks he's amused by the whole situation. You can't tell if he's angry. You can't get a read on Kaji. You just can't. And it's like, He just has this look on his face constantly where you can't read him. And that's intentional. And it's frustrating. But yeah, Asuka's like, oh shit. And so Kaji's like, today at 10:15 a.m., Unit 1 was attacked by Target A. And Shinji's like, which split from the target submerged 2 kilometers off of Suruga Bay. And so you just see them upside down. The EVA units. Oh god, like just tossed upside down. Yep. And then at the same time, plus 20 seconds, Unit 2 is halted by Target B. Same thing, in a crater, upside down. Oh my god. Just like head in the dirt. It's great. We have a comment from the chair of Project E. This is pathetic. This is all you... And so yeah, just the visual representation of how our two people screwed up. They'd screwed up, messed up the battle. Didn't work. And for a moment I was like, well, how are they all still alive if they didn't, if they messed up? But we find out why there's been some delay. But I love that the two of them in front of the projector, Asuka's like, this is all your fault. You screwed up my debut battle. And Shinji's like, what are you talking about? You're the one who did something stupid. And so then I love that Kaji just seems to be enjoying this. Kaji's like, okay. I love that Kaji's like, it's just shameless. What do you mean? We got in this trouble because you were such a rush to defeat it. It just feels like Kaji and Masato. That, again, I feel like Akagi connects more with Rei as a character because they are more cold and distant. But Akagi is way more perceptive of the emotions of Masato than Rei is. That is a distinct difference. Akagi is extremely perceptive and knows what's up. And Rei is removed from all of that. That's their big difference. That's the biggest difference between Akagi and Rei, is that emotional connection and understanding and perception. Masato and Kaji's banter reminds me a lot of Shinji and Asuka in this. The thing is, and Shinji becoming attracted to Asuka very much reminds me of how I would assume Masato became attracted to Kaji. The difference is, well, no, we'll talk about that bedroom scene. We'll talk about that. But there are some similarities. But I imagine that the banter between Shinji and Asuka very much is mirroring Kaji and Masato's from back 8 years ago. So 8 years ago, that's interesting. 8 years ago, there this. You look like a drowned rat. How lame. And then and he's like, you can talk. You're the same way. And so I like that as they're arguing, we see the debriefing continue. At 11:03, NERV abandoned the operation. Okay. And so then we go back to the top secret and transferred command to the UN secondary force. And then I love that Fuku-chan's like, you've humiliated us. And again, Kaji, we don't get a read on his facial expression there. I love, he's like, at 11:05, the UN forces made an attack with an N2 mine. We just nuked it. That's all we could do. At this point, the EVA units, which, in comparison, to be in NERV's favor, to be in NERV's defense on this one, yes, there were buildings destroyed by the EVA units doing this close combat with the Angel. There were buildings destroyed and collateral damage and possible lives endangered, but they didn't nuke it. It's like, oh my God. Like, the UN forces were like, well, let's just drop a bomb on it. Let's just do a landmine. Why not? It's terrifying. And then we'll have to redraw the map again. That part, I was like, oh my God. Like, the fact that they're like, well, we've completely obliterated this part of the countryside. Guess we're going to have to redraw the map now to reflect that. Like, it's just so nonchalant. Like, you're just like, well, again, we're just slowly decimating the earth. We'll just redraw it again. It's fine. Oh my God. Yeah, that was huge. And it said they succeeded in burning off 28% of the target structural substance. So not even a third. Not even a third. It's merely a temporary relief. A second attack is a matter of time. So we have 7th Angel, Ko and Otsu is what they're calling them. Okay, Ko and Otsu. I don't know what that means in Japanese. I'm assuming in the comments down below y'all will note on that. It's probably something yin and yang related or opposites or something like that. But yeah, so they basically just stalled it and it's going to regroup itself and regenerate and then come back for another attack because they didn't destroy the AT field in like the center of it. Interesting. Yep. So Kaji's like, and Kaji's like, well, let's think positive. We bought some time to regroup. We got something out of it. He's like, at least we did something good. And he's like, and then Fuku is like the grandpa that comes in. Like if Masato and Kaji are parents, they're not doing their job. Or they're like the big brother and big sister, they're not doing their job. Fuku's like the dad or the grandpa that's like, okay, whippersnappers, listen up. And this line here, we'll talk about maturity versus immaturity. He says, do you know what your job is? And Shinji doesn't reply, but Asuka says it's piloting the EVA. And she thinks that it's all about piloting the EVA. So she's like, again, viewing this as a game. She's like, oh, well, it's just, I want to be the one to pilot the EVA. That's my job. And he says, no, your job is to defeat the angels. It's not about you. That's what he's like saying. I love that old Fuku-chan here is like, the maturity of it is we are defeating angels. It doesn't matter how we do it. It's the fact that it gets done. That seems to be like NERV's big, that seems to be like why these people working for NERV are all on board with everything, even as sketch as it is. They're like, no, our job is to defeat the angels. How we do it doesn't matter. If we use the money of other countries, if we use child soldiers, if we destroy buildings, that's all superfluous to the fact that we've defeated the angels that are possibly the end of humanity. So it's for the greater good, right? It explains a lot of the mentality of NERV and why everybody's on board with it, even though we, the audience, are like, sketchy. But yeah, NERV does not exist to make grotesque displays like this. They have like the rescue float getting them out. Yep. And then them digging around. Therefore, you two must cooperate. And then still they're like, why should we? And he's like, enough. And he's like, I didn't come here to babysit. And he just pieces out. He's just like, you 14-year-old kids. I feel like everyone in the room realizes that they're dealing with children. They're dealing with literal kids. And for whatever reason that Gendo has told them, this is the only way that will work. And Akagi said this is the only way it'll work. So they just have to find a way to deal with it. And I love that Asuka's like, why is everybody so touchy around here? And Kaji's like, it's because adults don't like to be embarrassed. I like that Kaji coddles Asuka a lot. He coddles her quite a bit in this episode. But Kaji saying about adults saving face and not being embarrassed. And I feel like that's a commentary. I feel like we see that sort of a kind of a thematic, like, little note for us, the audience, that Shinji is going more into adulthood throughout this series, because from at the start of the thing, Shinji wasn't really affected by anything. And now he's starting to notice Asuka. He's starting to, like, get more self-conscious about himself. And so that could be tied to that fact of him growing up and becoming an adult and realizing it's if we're doing biblical imagery, it's the apple, eating the apple, like Adam and Eve eating the apple and gaining that knowledge about the world. And then it's like when they ate the apple and realized each other were naked and they got embarrassed about it, they became an adult. They were no longer pure anymore, right? They'd fallen into adulthood. And that seems like a direct reference to it that Kaji's making, is that adults are like this, which is fascinating, right? And so, yeah, Asuka just doesn't get it because she's still a child, right? I love it. I love it. And then Shinji's like, where's Miss Masato? Like, Shinji's like, where's she at, speaking of adults? And he's like, oh, cleaning things up. The person in charge takes extra responsibility. And at first, when we cut to her face and she's like, I thought that Gendo was there, but as they established if Gendo had been there, it would have been a lot worse. So glad he wasn't. But God, that the imagery in this when she just looks at the paperwork. Oh my God. Oh girl. I relate to Masato a lot in this series, especially in this episode. Like that sucks. That sucks so much. The internal protests, damage reports, a bill from the UN, and all of the complaints from the PR department as well. So it's like sprinkled in this. Another thing I love about Evangelion is that they tie in like the real world. How would this be in the real world, right? We don't see a lot of, in anime, you see like a post. I'll think of Bungo Stray Dogs as an example. There'll be like an incident in town where something will be destroyed. And then you'll see a character like Doppo afterwards reading the report. And it's like this thick. And he's like, well, here's the report from town and from the police department. It's like this thick. It's barely a thing, right? And you're like, wow, that's all you had to read through post this giant event? Okay. And lots of other anime do that. But in this, the hilarious part of it is the reality that, yeah, in the real world, it's an exaggeration, obviously, because there's just mounds of paper, but it's more truthful in that, yeah, you'd have all of this paperwork to deal with after this event before you could even move any further. I love it. It's great. It's great. It's great. It's great. Make sure you read them all. And she's like, I don't even need to read them. I know exactly what they're going to say. Like, if you're going to fight, do it here, right? Yeah, so basically don't come outside. Don't come to the rest of the world with these Evas. Stay in Tokyo 3, where you can damage your own stuff. She's like, oh, how insightful. I don't need them to tell me. I'll do it here as soon as the top side gets cleaned up. Yeah, she's like, we can't fight the Angels on our own home turf because we're only at like 26% capacity. We have to get the Pyramid Angel out of the way first. But Masato's saying, I'll destroy the angels without fail. And she had a very Gendo look there where she has the whole thing. It's very Gendo-esque, like, I'll destroy the angels. So, again, Masato, bless her heart, is not fully in the know. So, when she says that I'll destroy the angels without fail, and I love that Akagi's leaning over the papers being like, the vice commander is livid. You'll be demoted if you embarrass him again. And she's like, it was a silver lining that Commander Ikari was not here. And she's like, oh, if you'd been there, you'd been fired before you even saw all of these. So you brought me an idea to help me save my job, right? And she was like, just one. And she's like, you're amazing, Dr. Ritsuko Akagi. And she's like, oh, and she's like, it's good to have kind friends from way back. Again, red flags. Yeah, Masato's not in the know. I feel like Akagi and Kaji know things with Gendo that she does not. And it makes my heart ache because I'm like, Masato is just a tool in this just as much. And what hurts the most is that her and Kaji and Akagi are best friends from back years ago. So the fact that Akagi and Kaji are playing her, it's so tragic and I hate it. I think they are playing her to an extent. I think Akagi cares more about Masato and isn't playing her as much or doesn't want to, but is just following orders. Again, like Rei is following orders. Akagi may think a certain thing about Masato, but she's following orders. And I hate that because I feel like there's a part of Akagi that realizes that Masato's being played and she doesn't feel good about it, but she still goes through with it. It's like, And the whole thing with Kaji, we'll talk about that. But her saying it's good to have friends from way back. And that's when she says, unfortunately, I'm not the one who'll be bailing out my old friend. And then she says, this is Kaji's idea. And the thing on the drive says, to my honey. And she's like, Kaji's. But she says Kaji's, like disgusted that, oh, it was his idea. But the moment she grabs it and looks at it, that fondness in her eyes comes back. That fondness. And at that moment, you just see Akagi being like, you're still in love with him. And he's playing you. And the fact that Akagi won't tell her. It just, oh man, it's like, God, it's frustrating because Masato is just being used. I'm fully convinced she's just being used and I hate it. Because she's better than that. I'm like, ugh. So yeah, again, the subtlest details. Shinji's walking back home by himself. We see the moving truck in the background, and until you watch the rest of this episode, you don't realize it's the moving truck that just moved all of Asuka's stuff into his apartment. It's this show with the tiniest details. I love it. I love it so much. And yeah, he shows up, and he's like, I'm home. Not that anyone's here, of course, and you see like a bra hanging there, like all of her stuff all over the place. And then it says Clyde, and then Longa. Oh, and even the boxes have hearts and her initials on it. And he's like, what is this? And then she has like all the bags, and the bags are even monogrammed with her initials. Oh my God, Sal. Wow. She's like, don't be rude. And there's like German written all over it. These are my personal belongings. He's like, no, what are you doing here? I love it. And she's just like, well, it's more like, why are you still here? He's like, no. And she's like, you've been dumped for the new model. Oh my God, I love it. And she's like, Masato will be living with me. And he's like, no. It's a logical choice when you consider whose abilities are superior. So she thinks he's getting kicked out. We actually see her without her little red head things. And she's like, I'd rather live with Mr. Kaji. For a second, I thought that Kaji was going to live there too, but that's too on the nose. That's too much. As far as we know, he's not living there. But she's like, why are Japanese rooms so small? Like, all of her stuff. God. It's like, not even half my stuff fits. And Shinji's like, oh my God. He's like, no. And I love his poor face. Shinji's like, all of my things. And she's just tossed it into a box. What a winch. What a winch. Oh my God. I can relate to Shinji so much. Because I used to share an office with two other teachers, and one of the teachers was like, hey, and I had a desk in there, like a desk with a computer on it, and one of the teachers was like, hey, and it was right when I first started working there, and he was like, hey, I've got some like boxes of extra shirts and stuff for this club that I'm in charge of. Can I bring them in? And I was like, oh, sure. And then the next day when I came in, my desk was gone, and like there were just boxes of shirts everywhere. I was like, what is this? I had Shinji's reaction. And he didn't realize it was my desk. How he couldn't have. And so after I talked to him, he brought the desk back in. But at first, I had the exact same reaction as Shinji. I was like, where is my stuff? And it was all just like shoved outside in the hallway. And I was like, I fully relate to Shinji. Oh my God. And she's like, why don't the Japanese have any sense of privacy? That is a thing, too, that's really cool. Like a Western perspective versus the Japanese cultural perspective, that the doors don't lock, they just shut. But I love Masato coming in. Again, maturity versus immaturity. Where she's like, it's because the Japanese way is to consider the priorities and needs of others before one's own. Like, she just schools her there. So Atsuka is, again, like, what's the deal with privacy? The doors won't lock. And Masato explains that the Japanese, it's prioritizing the other over oneself. Which relates so much to the theme of the show in itself. And if you go back to episode 1, when Shinji was like, I don't want to pilot this unit, this EVA unit. No, I don't know anything about it. No, it kind of goes back to why Masato and Gendo and they were pushing him so hard, because they're like, oh, well, it's not about you. It's about protecting others, right? So that kind of ties thematically back to these episodes stringing them together and why they push Shinji so hard, because that's the Japanese way as she establishes it. It's interesting. And they're like, oh, Masato. It's like, looks like you guys are getting along great. And then they're both like, what? And I love that even though they're not supposed to be in sync, they answer her questions at the same time in sync. It's great. And she's like, this is all. And she has the boom box. And again, they say, how's that? So they don't realize it, but they're actually pretty much in sync, whether they realize it or not. They kind of get on the same wavelength. Mm-hmm. And the seventh angel has one and only weakness. I love it. I love Masato with her hair up. A simultaneously 2-point attack on each of the target's core. And we have the cars there, and the car's number 41 and 8. I don't know if that means anything, but there's the numbers on the car. All right. Each of the target's core point. Okay. Well, its components are separated. And again, I like that we have a green can and a red can, so like the opposite colors there. An attack by 2 Evas with perfect synchronized timing. So she's like, Kaji and I got this idea. We're going to keep you two here together until you learn perfect coordination. And then we'll coordinate the EVA units working together. So you're going to live together until that's possible. So you guys will have to become closer by interacting together. And then Asuka says it's always been said that boys and girls shouldn't sleep together after age 7. Like, who told you these things? Who told you these things? Didn't know there was an age thing. And Masato's like, shut up. We got, when Masato gets in serious, like, mission mode, she's not having it. She's like, the angel's restoring itself. It'll begin an assault in 6 days. We don't have a time. And Asuka's like, that's crazy. Here's how to make the crazy possible. In order for you to master perfect unison, you'll memorize the attack pattern that's been arranged to this music. So the dance is the attack pattern. In 6 days, you're going to memorize it. And they're both like, oh, we have to memorize a dance? Choreography? What? And I like that when they look at each other, Asuka's the first person to turn away. Like, no, not having it. I love the second title. Both of you dance like you want to win. Oh my God. It's great. And so we have lots of elevator conversations in this episode, but I love Toji and Ida running into the class rep. And so they've been gone for 3 days and they're all going to meet up. So the class rep is Asuka's friend. We still don't have her name. I'm guessing we'll get it at some point. But they're going to see their friends, and then they realize that they're in the same apartment. They're all like, are you serious? And the matching dance outfits are so 90s. I freaking love it. And poor Shinji, again, they're like, traitor. I love that they're both like doing the thing that they did with Masato and Kaji, and the class rep's just like eye twitching, like, are you serious? Like, matching outfits yet again in this stage and age. I can't believe it. Oh my God, poor Shinji. And he's like, well, Miss Masato said that the Japanese start by dressing the part, so she made us. Like, Shinji just looks... Shinji, talking about, male and female roles. It's funny because Shinji has been stuck dressing in the attire of the female character, right? Interestingly enough. And Shinji, which it's really kind of more of an androgynous outfit. It's really not that feminine. I think the only thing maybe feminine about it is the crop top that has the flowy frilliness of it. But his is white with green and hers is pink. So it's not really, I think it's more of the matching aspect of it. It's not really that it's even a feminine outfit because it's like a unitard essentially. So, but yeah, they both are like, we have to speak in sync and do things. And the class rep is like, this is filthy, you two. And so they're like, no, 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 you're wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right. And then Masato, in a rare Jean occasion, with Ray. So I feel like Masato realized that things aren't going well. They're not really getting in sync like they should be. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring in Ray. She's going to be our buffer. And Ray just looks like she'd rather be anywhere else. She does not want to take part in these shenanigans, but she doesn't have a choice. So I love that once, and then Toji's like, can you please explain this? And then she does, and everything's fine. Everybody's like, oh, it's to save the world. Okay, we're fine. I love the class rep has Pin Pin, and it's just like, you're the most adorable penguin ever. But you should have told us this to begin with. And Masato's like, ah. And they're like, well, the coordination, as you can see. Mm-hmm. And it's like just a game of, it's like a prototype for Dance Dance Revolution. I love it. It's great. And they're just trying to sync up. And it's just not working. Are you surprised? I couldn't lower myself to Shinji's level. And Shinji's just like on the ground, like just flailing. It's amazing. It's an utterly impossible idea. And Masato's like, oh, you give up? And she's like, well, you don't have anybody else, do you? That's the thing. We tied back a few episodes ago to where Shinji was like, well, you have to depend on me, right? And Masato's like, actually, now that we have more pilots, we have more options. And it looks like Ray has just been going over the dance choreography on the clipboard that Masato gave her. And I was like, oh, well, actually, Ray, you want to try it? Why don't you give it a try? And she says, yes, because it was an order. And Asuka's like, wait, what? And then, of course, I like that Shinji looks over at her like, okay. Again, I feel like Ray and Shinji emotionally are better connected. And Asuka's just terrified. Asuka's like, oh. Because Masato says, it looks like I should alter the operation to pair Shinji and Ray. And she's like, well, no. And you just see Asuka being like, wait, no, stop. I can't stand it. I've had enough. And you see that she just gets frustrated because, yeah, Asuka's whole deal is that she wants to be the hero. She wants to be the one responsible for saving the world and wants to prove herself. And in this moment, these two that she considers to be not worthy of being pilots are syncing up better than her and Shinji. And so Masato's like, well, maybe I'll just give it to them. And she's like, and you just see, I love how they animate her frustration and they animate her sadness and just desperation at that moment. Like, all my work, all the things I've built towards is just falling apart because she can't work with these people she doesn't consider worthy of being pilots. Like, it's so well done, like that moment. And Shinji noticing that she just like slams the door shut to get away from them. And the door still goes open. And then the class rep goes after her. Even the devil cries sometimes. I love that the class rep is like, Ikari! And he's like, what? She's like, go after her. And he's like, why? You made a girl cry. Take responsibility. And I'm like, and on the one hand, again, we talk about like the gender roles and everything in this moment. But I'm like, well, it wasn't really Shinji that made her cry. It was Ray. Ray made her cry because Ray proved that Asuka was not the only one that could sync, that was needed to sync up with Shinji, that Ray could take her place if needed. So it's funny because the class rep getting onto Shinji, I'm like, Shinji just gets the shaft in terms of like gender roles in this and normalization and getting blamed for things in this series. Because in all honesty, I don't think it was Shinji that made her cry. It was Ray. Ray being the one that could replace her is what frustrated her so much. And Shinji's just like, what did I do? And so Shinji gets pushed. But again, Shinji is the one that needed to go after Asuka because Ray is so emotionally distant. Ray wouldn't have done anything. She would just probably stood by Asuka and been like, get over it. And then just walked away. That's probably what Ray would have done. Ray would have had no reason to try to relate to Asuka in the moment. I thought, honestly, that Asuka was standing in front of the refrigerator with beer that's Masato's, but no, she's not. She's at a convenience store. And I like that how she cools off is that she's in front, like she has the door open and she's just sitting there. Also noteworthy, and just little tiny details with this grocery store, but like the freezer part seems like it's got food in it, but if you look on the shelves, it's pretty spare, right? It's pretty, there's only like a couple cans of things and like a few bags of chips and stuff. It's not very well stocked. And we've established there's not a lot of people in New Tokyo 3, so there's just not a lot of resources. And again, this series shows things so subtly that you don't really, if you don't pay attention to it, I feel like it can go over your head. And just those little tiny details, I'm like, because I don't think it's the fact that they didn't want to draw it, because they draw the refrigerator stocked with lots of drinks and things. And this series has had an incredible attention to detail. So I feel like just the stuff on the shelves being spare is a sign that there's not a lot of resources there. That's interesting, because we are in a post-apocalyptic world, right? And I love that he gets down on her level and she's like, I have no choice but to pilot the Eva. So Asuka feels like she has no choice, that her entire destiny is tied to the Eva unit, whether she likes it or not. And she's like, my whole fate has tied me to this Eva, but I'm not even allowed to do the job that I don't have a choice but to do. And so it's very frustrating, right? That this has been tasked to you, this one job, and you still can't do it. So you get her frustration in this moment. And I love I love that image. I want to take a picture of it. Of her with the refrigerator glass, of the glass door, and her and Shinji's reflection. It's not synced up, but it's side by side there. It's not synchronized, but it's together. Like they're both in the same. The only thing that's kind of synchronized is their hair. That's really cool though. I like that a lot. She's like, I'll do it. She's like, fine. Since it's come to this, I'll show up both Rei and Masato. So again, that establishes that unlike what the class rep said, Asuka wasn't mad at Shinji. She was mad with Rei and Masato, because Masato doubts her ability to do the job, and Rei isn't compassionate at all towards what Asuka believes is like her plight and all of this. She doesn't think Rei cares, which Rei doesn't, but interesting. And they have all the groceries and eating a sandwich. And then Shinji says, you don't have to show them up. He's like, you don't have to prove anything to them. And she's like, you're being too easy on them. You're a man, aren't you? Again, doing this whole like gender thing. Like you're a man, aren't you? Like you should be more like hardcore about things. Why are you being so soft? And Shinji's like, it's just how I am. And he's like, ugh. And like, for their attack on my pride, I'll pay them back 10 times over. So she's like, you should man up, Shinji. You know, and she thinks that Masato and Rei have attacked her pride and thinking that she's not good enough. And I wonder if her saying like Shinji should, because Shinji has been told repetitively over the course of the series so far to man up. And I wonder if that has an impact on the bedroom scene later on where he does try to kiss her, and that's expected of him. But I do think there is some natural attraction towards her that he has. And he's a teenage boy, so what can we do? I love it. And he just looks up at her like, and he smiles at her like, I love that point where he smiles at her. And it's just like he gets what she means. He gets that he gets in that moment that Asuka is just a kid like him and has this pride as a person. And I like that he's like, oh, he finds that endearing with her, that she's really not mad at them because she thinks that they're evil or anything. It's just she has her own personal feelings and feels like they're being attacked, and that's what she's mad at. And Shinji's like, I can kind of relate to that. I like that smile he gives her. It's really good. So they circle the 11th, Friday the 11th. And then on Monday, things don't go well. They can't fully get synced up. She kicks him. 2 more days. They have the toothpaste scene. They're still at each other's throats. I really like that image of them. I love that image of them next to each other. I want to get a picture of it. I want to go back and get a picture. I love her kicking him. It's great. But yeah, so things aren't totally working well. And then I'll have to go back and get a picture. And then they're trying to watch TV together. Doesn't matter, red and orange, which are kind of like, they're complementary colors, but they're not on the color wheel, it's a little different. You have blue that's primary and orange that's secondary, kind of like red's primary, green secondary. But yeah. And then we see Masato with in between Shinji and Asuka. And then, of course, Shinji and Pin Pin have to use the bathroom. And Asuka's like taking her time, swinging the door. It's great. Them eating ramen together in sync. Listening to the music in sync. I love the imagery of that. And then above them, interestingly enough, above them we have the underwear. And I think it's both her underwear, but it's funny because you have the bra on Shinji's side and the underwear on Asuka's side. Again, just little things. But then they start to sync up. It's great. They manage to get it right before the day before the attack. Perfect timing. And then we have Asuka coming out of the shower, asking where Masato is. And Shinji is not looking her way. And he's like, at work. She called earlier. She'll be there all night. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. I love he's hanging out, look at the magazine. He has his Walkman, but, and she's like, oh, that means that we're alone all night, that we're all alone tonight. And he's like, wait, what? And then as she says that, she grabs her bedding and goes to the other room. So it's kind of a tease where she's like, nope. And Shinji's like, wait, what? And she's like, this is the impenetrable wall of Jericho. Yeah. So this scene is interesting because there's an aspect of it where Asuka knows exactly what she's doing. And they're both kids. So she isn't quite aware of how she's, tempting Shinji, but it's like she didn't have to bring it up like she did. She could have just grabbed the bedding, put it over there and said, oh, we're alone tonight, so Masato's not here to sleep in between us. I'm sleeping over here. That's all she had to do. But because it's Asuka's personality, she makes a big deal about it, right? And she seems to make a big deal about sexuality and about, Shinji being a pervert or whatever, which he's really not. He's just a kid. And he's different than most of the other teenage boys that she's around. And so there is an aspect of innocence to it where she's like, well, I'm going to sleep over here, And she doesn't try to get Shinji riled up at all. But then when she opens the door back up, she is not aware that as she's leaning over, like, he can clearly see through her shirt. Like, her shirt's like open like this and, her boobs are hanging out. And Shinji is privy to that. And Shinji, there are little things, like Shinji's eyes, like throughout this scene, Shinji's eyes are like looking down and then look back up at her like, do you realize how you're positioned here? Like, do you realize that your boobs are hanging out? Because Shinji's like, I notice. And Shinji's eyes don't linger on it. He looks back up at her face to make eye contact, but he knows that it's there. Shinji is aware of her sexuality. He's aware of it. He's like just being polite as he can, but he's just like, and he's like, what? And she's like, take one step over this wall and you're a dead man. Now it's time for children to go to bed. And yeah, and then shuts the door. So it's like whether she's aware of it or not, Shinji is aware that she's a woman and, they're 14 years old. They're going through puberty. It's all there. And then I love that she says, how can the Japanese sleep on the floor? I can't believe it. So yeah. And then we cut to, I love that we have the light that is on the building. It looks like the eye of the Eva. It does. It's the weirdest thing, right? It's kind of crazy. And you have that light, and it's almost like the building with the eye of the Eva is watching Shinji. It's kind of creepy, the imagery is. But Shinji, it's like the image is there. There's this tension in the air. And he's pretending to be asleep with the Walkman, right? And he's stopped on the track that he always goes back to, right? He's stopped on the track. And I love that she opens up the door to see if he's asleep. She goes to the bathroom, and he's paused it to hear her. And like he's listening for her. And then the moment she comes back out of the bathroom, he pretends to be asleep again. Right? Okay. And then notices that she comes down, sits behind. So it's like there is this tension between them that's created. There's been this sexual tension that's created between them. And I can relate to Shinji because if you like somebody, I feel like he does like Asuka a little bit, but he doesn't know how to handle her or what to do with these emotions. So I have totally been where Shinji's been, where, you're asleep and then you notice somebody's in the room. And you're like, you don't know what to do. And Shinji is being respectful to her. And for the record, Shinji did not go to her bedroom. Like, he couldn't sleep because he knows that there's this like tension in the air and he doesn't understand it. But he didn't try to go to her room. She came to him. So in terms of being like Kaji, Asuka a little bit, she showed up and slept beside him. If she really didn't want, so I feel like it's mutual. This attraction between them is mutual because Shinji obviously is feeling this attraction towards Asuka after being in close proximity with her the last week. And she's tsundere. Someone in the comments said she's the OG tsundere. She is, because she has this attraction to Shinji as well. But she's blowing it off. She's like, nah, I'm not attracted to you. Get out of here. Nah. But she comes to him. She goes to his room and sleeps beside him. And I'm like, girl, if you really didn't like him, if you really didn't want him anywhere near you, why did you sleep next to him? Why did you go to him? But it's just as much on her. And that's when, and I love that he bugs out. And again, we cut the program right around that time. It's funny. And of course, the first thing we see is a shot of her breasts. That's like the first thing that he sees. And then he looks up and sees that she's sleeping next to him. And Shinji looks up at her face, and then he sees her boobs. And then he realizes that they're like right next to each other. And he's like, oh my God, what are we doing? And then he presses it and it's the fast forward button. It's just like, it's on fast forward and he's like, oh my God. And there's this tension because he's like, if I stop the tape, is she going to hear it and wake up and realize that I'm not asleep? So he's like, I don't know what to do. But then she gets closer and closer to him. Like, if you notice, she gets closer and closer and he's like, what do I do? And he's this 14-year-old kid, so he's attracted to her. And their heads both get really close. Like, it tips up just the same way. So I'm like, are they about to kiss? And then, and I love that the camera angle shows that he's getting really close to her, like he's thinking about doing it. Because she's like super close. And that's when she says, Mama. And he stops. Like, he's just sweating. And he stops and she's crying. And that's when the program shuts off. And it's back. And then it's like, I love that transition. It just cuts and he's moved over to as far away from her as possible to the other side of the room. He's like, nope. So, again, we're talking about immaturity and maturity here. In this moment, we immediately cut from this two that have this. Here's the thing. Shinji and Asuka having this sexual, physical attraction towards one another. But Shinji restrains himself. Right? Because he knows it's not right. He knows that kissing her in this moment while she's asleep, that all of the circumstance, they're about to go battle in Eva tomorrow. They've worked all week on synchronizing and getting on the same wavelength. He's like, kissing her would not be right. Nope, not going to do it. So he makes the mature decision to not do that and not screw up things for tomorrow until afterwards when it all comes out in the wash. But he's like, no, he restrains himself. He shows restraint, this 14-year-old boy that's going through all this hormonal change and everything. He's like, nope, I'm good. Everything's fine. And what do we cut to? We cut to the elevator. And I love that. And that moment when he gets away from her, Asuka rolls over in his direction. Like, that was the right thing to do, right? Like, she was, rolls over towards him, right? Mm-hmm. And then I love that he's like, you're just a child yourself. Mm-hmm. Being like, yeah, he's like, we're both just kids. Like, we're not in the emotional, mature place to deal with something like this, right? And you could say that he says when you're just a child yourself, he's talking about himself. He's talking about Asuka. He's like, hey, you could be talking about Asuka being like, you pretend to be this mature person, but he's like, no, you're just a kid the same as me. Or he's like, you're just a child. You shouldn't be doing this with her. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, as he pulls over the covers, then we cut to this scene with Kaji and Masato being like, no, somebody will see us. Oh my gosh. I wanted romance in my sci-fi. I am getting it, but oh my God, Kaji. and like has like the leg between her legs. Oh my God. And has her grabbed like there is definitely Kaji made the move. Kaji made the move in this, right? Because he's like, it's very much a sign of his dominance in this scene, that the immaturity of Kaji making a move on Masato, right? Making that move on her. Because, yeah, everything about the physicality of this scene is like Kaji's the one that did the move, and he's the one in the dominant position here. Because he's like got her by the arms, right? And then he like lets go of her to draw her in to kiss her. And then she's looking to see like when the elevator, like how much time do they have in the elevator? When is it gonna stop? Right? Like she's like, she wants it, but she also realizes the danger of the situation, so she's waiting for it to stop, and then her backing out. And like, honestly, there's nothing between us anymore. Don't do that again. And here's the immaturity part, like, because she's like, there's nothing between us. Stop it. Don't do it. And Kaji, our seducer, our snake, is like, but your lips didn't say no. I'm pretty sure she just told you no. Like, stop it. And he's like, well, you didn't fight me. And she's just looking, he's like, your lips or your words? Which one should I trust? And I'm like, well, you put the move on her, though. Like, and the part that I hate about Kaji at this point is that he knows how she feels. He has to know how she feels about him. And he is totally taking advantage of her. He is completely taking advantage of her love for him. Because it's like, you're an adult. You should be mature and know. Like, you should be mature and know. And so that line from Shinji, you're just a child yourself, like that, he should know better, right? He should know he knows exactly what he's doing. And when he's like, which should I trust, your lips or your words? It's like, well, if you didn't push yourself on her, she probably wouldn't be in that position. And that is true to an extent. She does love him still, but she also realizes what a jerk he is. And so it's like, that's so hard. If you like somebody and you realize they're not a good person and you shouldn't be around them, that's toxic. You should get away from them. But he's stuck there with her. So, oh my God. Yeah, and she knocks away the files. And that little move where he bows to her as she knocks the files away. And he's just, with that smirk. Oh, I love it. And she gathers all the stuff up. And I love that she just gets mad and throws it at the elevator. Yep. And then she goes to like sit there and look at the city skyline, and then goes to see her friend Akagi, who gives her a coffee. You're unusually sober today. Yeah, if you make it to where Masato doesn't drink. Yeah. And she's like, yeah, a little. So I think Masato is self-aware a little bit of how much she drinks. And she's like, no, I don't need a drink right now. Don't need to be and she's like, work or a man. So Akagi knows. She's like, a lot of things. Yeah. I love that there's this line. I love that there's like the elevator line between them. Just the composition of these scenes and the way that they're drawn is beautiful. And so she's like, are you still in love? And then she's like, don't say weird stuff like that, which is obviously true. Who'd want that jerk? And I love that Kagi's like, it may have been a youthful indiscretion, but I can't believe I was dating a jerk like him. It's the biggest blemish in my life. And I love that Akagi's like, well, I meant that he may still like you. Did I scare you? So I feel like Akagi, in some sense, Akagi's trying to be a friend, but in some sense she's fanning the flames. Because I'm like, Akagi, do you really think that Kaji still loves her? Or are you just, because you know how much of a player he is. So I feel like Akagi is on the one hand being a good friend and being there for Masato, but on the other end, she's still kind of fanning this flame when you know that Kaji's kind of a toxic person. I'm like, why would you kind of lead Masato on to thinking that Kaji likes her when you can clearly see Masato is struggling with this and wants to get over him? So, And then, yeah, Masato's like, you lousy. Getting angry only shows his sore spot. Why not be more honest with your feelings this time? And so, again, Akagi is trying to tell Masato, like, you just need to be upfront with him. If you still love him, you need to tell him. But if you don't want to still be in love with him, you need to still tell him. And she kind She kind of did. She kind of told him to get away from her. So it's like, yeah, she does need to tell Kaji that she still loves him, because Masato is putting up a front. She's like, who'd want to date you? You're awful. But then she makes out with him. So I'm like, Akagi's like, you need to be just direct and just tell him what you're telling me and just tell him that you want to get over it. And Masato's kind of doing that, but Akagi's like, you need to do more of that. Just be as upfront as possible. Things are different than 8 years ago. So it's been 8 years. 8 years, and so that would be 7 years after the impact. So they're clearly in their like late 20s now, probably. But yeah, so 8 years ago, things are different. And she's like, it hasn't changed. Not a bit. Still too immature. And I love that look that Akagi gives her. God, that look. It's so good. So Masato's like, no, Kaji's not changed at all. Like, our relationship hasn't changed. It's still too immature. We're not doing the mature thing here. We're still leading each other on, and it's still toxic, and it's not changed. And that look from Akagi, it's one of my favorite looks from Akagi. She looks so beautiful there. But damn. She's like, well, I gotta get to work. Tomorrow is the big day. Oh God, that scene. I was like, okay, give me this toxic romance in my NGE. I'm here for it. I'm here for this to shake things up. I'm for a show. That's what I was thinking. Like, this show does talk a lot about gender roles, about sexuality, about relationships, and the expectations within them. And so having this character Kaji come on the scene, it's complicating things in like the best way possible. I love it. But yeah. So then we go to fight the monsters, and it's back to being together again, and the final line at Gora. And then again, these three are all together again. Like, and Kaji's in the official NERV uniform now. He's not in his like suit and tie like before. I like that no matter what, Masato kind of wears whatever she wants. But Kaji's kind of in the more traditional NERV get up now rather than his other clothes, right? And she's like, deploy your AT fields as soon as the music starts. Then stick to the operation. Got it, you two? Okay. So, all right. And then from here on in, she's like, full power, maximum speed from the start. Got it? And he's like, I know that. We'll finish it in 62 seconds. And from here, I love this. I love that the entire episode has been a build-up to the 1 minute of battle that we get. We just get 1 minute. It's glorious. No time is wasted. Every second is gloriously animated. It's beautiful. It's awesome. They're in sync. It's just, I love it. You know, other shows would spend like an entire, it's such a, if you consider the other shows that were happening at the same time as this, like Dragon Ball Z, that would spend an entire season almost on one battle. That spend 20 episodes on a battle, like hours upon hours of just battle footage. And here, it's 1 minute. 1 minute, the battle's over, everything's in sync, all the work leading up to it happens. They're able to use all the equipment that was given to them in line. It's great. Masato, you don't hear what Masato's saying, but they fire. And then the music on top of it, this like operatic music, Masato's like, fire all the lasers. It's, oh my God, it's so good. It's so good. And they're in sync. And I love that we just get the imagery of Shinji and Asuka, like their faces like synchronizing, and then the two EVA units side by side. Yep. It's so great. I love it. And then it comes back to being one. And I love that Shinji looks over to her. She looks over to him. She's like, yeah. And then they work together. And I love that we get, like, everybody's like, yep, Fuku, Masato, Kaji, Akagi, everybody's like, right. And I love that it lingers on Masato, right? And you have, like, the rainbow and everything as they spin. Oh my God, it's great. And then they kick it at the same time and bust through the field and bust open the little orb that kills it. And then it blows up in this giant explosion, which, you know, destroys, you know, basically our shell's even. She's like, damn it, they couldn't get out in time. But both Evas are confirmed operational. And then it all goes downhill from here. The mission accomplished, and she's like, geez. And then Akagi's like, this is pathetic. We basically destroyed the Angel, but also the Eva units. I love that they have the little phone line between the two of them, but they don't realize that they're on speaker with everyone and they can all hear. And she's like, how dare you do that to my unit too? And he's like, what are you talking about? You're the one who fell on me. It's just, this is glorious. And they're like, oh my God, you're out of it. What were you doing staying up so late last night? And so she was aware. He was like, image training for today's battle. And then Asuka saying, liar, I know you tried to kiss me while I was sleeping. And I love that the one girl in the command center is like, look at these two kids. The one boy's like, why are we hearing TMI? Akagi's like, why did we expect any different? And Kaji's like, it's Asuka. And Masato's like, are you shitting me? Oh my God. And then she's like, were you awake? He's like, that's awful. I was just kidding, but it was real. You kissed me? And he's like, no. I love that Shinji did tell her. He's like, I stopped. I didn't. And she's like, you pervert, you lech, you fiend. I can't believe you. And it's like she hits him through the phone. And he's like, it's because you talk in your sleep and toss and turn so much. And I love that Fuku-chan's like, we are dealing with literal children. These kids are embarrassing us again. So that whole line, again, that line that Kaji said back in the last episode about does Masato still toss and turn in her sleep? So we've got these comparisons of Kaji and Masato to Shinji and Asuka, right? The whole line about Masato and Asuka both tossing and turning in their sleep. And so it's curious because it's like, is Shinji, if we were going to compare Shinji and Kaji together, which I feel like you have Shinji, we have our square here. We have Shinji and Asuka, and we have Masato, and we have Kaji. And I feel like if you're going to compare Shinji and Kaji together, maybe both of them feel like they both found physical attraction to Masato and Asuka, who have similar personalities in terms of being, because if you look at Asuka and Masato, both of them have fiery personalities. They both want to be considered competent at their job. They both want to be considered useful and that they are good at their job. And they both have this like gung-ho prowess when it comes to like military and getting the job done. They both ascribe to more masculine roles in terms of that from what we've stereotypically seen in stories, right? Not that necessarily being gung-ho and stuff is masculine, not that, but in stories like this, in shonen, that's typically what those roles are ascribed to. And so we see that similarity. And we could see how Shinji and Kaji are both similar in that both Shinji and Kaji become attracted to that. Shinji to Masato in more like a sister role, but becoming attracted to Asuka in maybe more of something that could be romantic, right? There's that. But Kaji is also more like Asuka in the fact that they kind of make the move, right? Asuka and Kaji both made the move. Kaji made the move on Masato, and Asuka made the move towards Shinji by going into the bedroom. Like, they both made the first move, and it just kind of went from there. And then Shinji and Masato are both similar in that they both are kind of like, why are we attracted to these people? What's the deal? Like, no, they're a jerk. Get away from me. And their personalities are similar. So it's very interesting how these four characters have similarities with one another, with each other, but they are very different. So that's really cool. But like I said in the last episode, I feel like Shinji and Asuka are going to be able to get along and have this like tsundere, like headbutting relationship with one another, but they both understand and get one another in a different way too. But I feel like Shinji and Rei have this very emotional connection with one another that kind of is beyond physicality. I feel like the attraction with Shinji to Asuka is very physical, and it relates to Asuka being such a vibrant personality. But with Rei and Shinji, I feel like that attraction is more emotional, and that connection is more like on a mental level, which is really cool. So, and then Asuka and Rei seem to have no connection with one another, which is funny. But I don't see this as a love triangle because I don't think Shinji is romantically attracted to Rei at all. I think he just views her more on like an emotional level as being close to her. And I don't think that Shinji necessarily wants to be in a relationship at all with Asuka, but he is physically attracted to her, or at least is getting to be in that situation where he's finding himself physically attracted to her. So that's going to be interesting moving forward to see how that goes, to see how that's going to be handled, right? Like, what are we going to do with that, right? How's that going to work? So I loved this episode, though. This episode was so good. Is it my favorite? It might be my new favorite. 7, 8, 9, just from episode 7 on, it is not, from episode 6 on, it hasn't let up. So, oh, buddy, I loved this episode. This was great. I'm sure there's going to be lots in the comment there's going to be lots in the comment section to talk about down below. So please no spoilers, but I'm excited to hear your thoughts about this episode, about our snake Kaji, without spoiling me, your thoughts on this. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this episode. Don't spoil me about things that will happen in the future or give me hints or anything like that. I don't want that. But just initial thoughts of what you guys thought of the episode with Kaji, with the relationship between Shinji and Asuka, like how's with Rei involved, like how this all matches up. And I just feel bad for Masato. I really do. I relate to this girl a lot and I feel for her. So, but in any case, I hope that y'all enjoyed this reaction discussion. I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with episode 10 of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Bye.